To understand the contemporary Middle East, one must grapple with a profound historical paradox. Today, the State of Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran are locked in what many military historians consider the region's most dangerous and protracted shadow war. It is a conflict defined by advanced cyber sabotage, clandestine assassinations, proxy militias, and the looming spectre of nuclear proliferation. Yet to view this intense enmity as an eternal or inevitable condition of the region is a fundamental misreading of history. There was a time, not so long ago, in the grand tapestry of geopolitical epochs, when these two non-Arab nations viewed each other not through the crosshairs of a ballistic missile targeting system, but through the lens of strategic necessity and mutual benefit. They were, in fact, the closest of allies. The journey from clandestine partners sharing intelligence and oil to sworn adversaries engaged in a multi-front existential struggle is one of the most remarkable and consequential geopolitical shifts of the 20th century. As we delve into the military and diplomatic archives, we must ask, how did a relationship built on the pragmatic foundations of mutual survival devolve into an ideological and military confrontation that threatens to engulf the entire region in conflict? The answer lies not merely in religious ideology, but in the cold, calculating shifts of global power dynamics. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East was undergoing a seismic transformation. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 sent shockwaves through the Arab world, resulting in immediate military conflict and an enduring regional boycott. Concurrently, the imperial state of Iran, under the rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, was navigating its own precarious position. Iran was a proud, ancient Persian civilization, distinct from its Arab neighbors, and increasingly wary of the rising tide of pan-Arab nationalism championed by leaders like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. Furthermore, the shadow of the Soviet Union loomed large to the north, presenting a constant strategic threat to Iranian sovereignty. In this volatile environment, both Israel and Iran found themselves as non-Arab anomalies in a predominantly Arab region, surrounded by hostile forces and facing existential threats. This shared sense of isolation and mutual apprehension regarding Soviet expansionism and Arab unity created an unlikely yet highly pragmatic alignment of interests. The foundation for an alliance was not built upon shared cultural values or deep historical affection, but rather on the stark, unsentimental calculations of realpolitik and national survival in a hostile neighborhood. The strategic architectural framework for this nascent relationship was conceptualized by Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. Faced with a unified wall of Arab hostility, Ben-Gurion formulated what became known in military and diplomatic circles as the periphery doctrine. The core tenet of this grand strategy was elegantly simple yet profoundly ambitious. If Israel could not forge alliances with its immediate Arab neighbors, it must leapfrog over them to build strategic partnerships with non-Arab states and minority groups on the outer edges of the Middle East. The primary pillars of this doctrine were Turkey, Ethiopia, and most crucially, Imperial Iran. For the strategists in Jerusalem, Iran represented the ultimate geopolitical prize. It was a vast, resource-rich nation with a growing military apparatus and a shared distrust of Arab radicalism. By cultivating a strong, albeit quiet, partnership with Tehran, Israel aimed to counterbalance the power of the Arab states, secure vital energy resources, and break out of its geopolitical encirclement. This doctrine dictated Israeli foreign policy for decades, transforming Iran from a distant Persian empire into a vital cornerstone of Israeli national security and regional defense planning. The alliance was a masterclass in strategic maneuvering. The first significant diplomatic breakthrough occurred in 1950, when Iran took the bold step of granting Israel de facto recognition. Following Turkey, Iran became only the second Muslim-majority nation to acknowledge the existence of the Jewish state. This decision was not heavily publicized. Rather, it was a quiet, calculated move managed meticulously behind closed doors to avoid inciting anger among Iran's own clerical establishment and the broader Islamic world. The Shah's government recognized the utility of Israeli agricultural expertise, medical advancements, and, increasingly, its military and intelligence capabilities. To manage this delicate relationship, Israel established an unofficial diplomatic mission in Tehran, operating under the guise of an economic delegation. This compound soon evolved into a bustling hub of diplomatic and intelligence activity, functioning effectively as an embassy in all but name. The pragmatic nature of this recognition set the tone for the decades that followed. It was an alliance characterized by profound depth and extensive cooperation, yet deliberately kept in the shadows. Both nations understood the risks of public flaunting, preferring instead the tangible benefits of clandestine collaboration over the symbolic victories of open diplomatic pageantry. Perhaps the most vital artery connecting Israel and Iran during this golden era of cooperation was the flow of crude oil. Following the Sinai campaign of 1956, Israel secured access to the Red Sea and, by extension, a direct maritime route to Iran. In the face of a comprehensive Arab oil embargo, Israel's energy security was critically vulnerable. Iran stepped into this breach, becoming Israel's primary supplier of petroleum. To facilitate this massive logistical undertaking, the two nations embarked on an extraordinarily ambitious joint infrastructure project, the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline. Constructed in the late 1960s, this pipeline allowed Iranian oil tankers to offload their cargo at the Red Sea port of Eilat. The oil was then pumped across the Negev desert to the Mediterranean port of Ashkelon, where it was either refined for Israeli domestic consumption or exported to lucrative European markets, conveniently bypassing the Egyptian-controlled Suez Canal. This joint venture was a masterstroke of economic and strategic synergy. It provided Israel with a secure, reliable energy lifeline, essential for its growing mechanized military and industrial base, while offering the Shah a highly profitable, discreet export route that circumvented Arab political pressure. Beneath the veneer of economic cooperation lay a deeply entrenched, highly classified intelligence alliance. The Israeli intelligence agency Mossad and the Iranian internal security apparatus Savak forged a formidable partnership known as Operation Trident, which also included Turkish intelligence. This trilateral intelligence sharing agreement was primarily focused on countering Soviet espionage and subverting the spread of radical Arab nationalism, which both nations viewed as a direct threat to their respective regimes. Mossad operatives played a crucial role in training Savak officers in advanced surveillance techniques, interrogation methods, and counter-insurgency tactics. In return, Iran provided Israel with invaluable listening posts along its borders with Iraq and the Soviet Union, granting Israeli military intelligence unprecedented early warning capabilities and deep operational reach into the heart of the Middle East. The level of trust between the intelligence echelons was extraordinary. They conducted joint operations, shared highly sensitive intercepts, and coordinated strategies to destabilize mutual adversaries. This clandestine nexus formed the invisible bedrock of the Iranian-Israeli alliance, operating far from public scrutiny but fundamentally shaping the balance of power in the region. Beyond the shadowy realms of espionage and military strategy, the relationship flourished in the civic and economic spheres. Israel, having rapidly developed innovative agricultural techniques to cultivate its own arid landscapes, found an eager partner in Iran. The Shah, intent on modernizing his nation through his ambitious White Revolution, heavily relied on Israeli agronomists, engineers, and water management experts. Israeli specialists were dispatched across Iran to implement advanced drip irrigation systems, establish modern dairy farms, and optimize crop yields in the harsh Persian terrain. Following the devastating Qazvin earthquake in 1962, Israeli search and rescue teams, along with construction crews, were among the first to arrive, playing a pivotal role in rebuilding the shattered region. The economic ties were equally robust. Israeli construction firms won massive contracts to build housing projects, luxury hotels, and infrastructure in Tehran. Trade between the two nations soared, encompassing everything from heavy machinery to consumer goods. For a time, the synergy seemed boundless, a testament to how two distinct nations could leverage their respective strengths to foster mutual prosperity, seemingly impervious to the political tempests raging in the surrounding Arab states. The zenith of this bilateral relationship was undoubtedly reached in the late 1970s through a highly classified military endeavor codenamed Project Flower. By this time, the Shah was flush with petrodollars and possessed an insatiable appetite for advanced military hardware, aiming to transform Iran into the undisputed hegemon of the Persian Gulf. Israel, meanwhile, possessed cutting-edge defense technology, but desperately lacked the capital to fund its expensive research and development programs. Project Flower was the perfect albeit secretive, marriage of these needs. The initiative involved a massive Iranian investment amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars into the joint development of advanced weapons systems, most notably a sophisticated anti-ship missile based on Israeli designs. In exchange for the funding, Iran was to receive the final production models and the technology transfer required to manufacture the missiles domestically. This project represented a profound level of strategic trust. Israel was willing to share its most guarded military secrets with a foreign power. It was an unprecedented military-industrial partnership that underscored just how deeply intertwined the defense establishments of Jerusalem and Tehran had become on the eve of historical upheaval. However, the foundations of this seemingly impregnable alliance were resting on increasingly unstable ground. As the 1970s progressed, the Shah's rapid modernization programs, coupled with the heavy-handed and often brutal tactics of the Savak, generated deep-seated resentment among broad swathes of the Iranian populace. Economic disparities widened, and traditional religious sectors felt alienated by the aggressive secularization of society. The opposition, an eclectic coalition of Marxists, students, and deeply conservative clerics, began to coalesce. In this simmering cauldron of domestic discontent, the Shah's close ties with the United States and Israel became a potent weapon for his detractors. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the charismatic and exiled cleric, brilliantly weaponized anti-Zionism, framing the Shah not merely as a corrupt monarch, but as a puppet of American imperialism and a servant of Israeli interests. The clandestine alliance, once a closely guarded asset, was dragged into the light and transformed into a symbol of national humiliation. The rhetoric of the revolution increasingly intertwined the liberation of Iran from the Shah with the liberation of Palestine from Israel, setting the ideological stage for a catastrophic rupture. The year 1979 marked the definitive turning point in the modern history of the Middle East. The Iranian Revolution, a massive popular uprising, successfully toppled the millennia-old Persian monarchy, forcing the Shah into permanent exile. The return of Ayatollah Khomeini to Tehran heralded the birth of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was not merely a change in government, it was a profound ideological metamorphosis. The new regime sought to fundamentally restructure Iranian society based on strict Islamic principles and, crucially, to export this revolutionary zeal across the Muslim world. The pragmatic, nation-state-oriented foreign policy of the Shah was instantly discarded, replaced by a pan-Islamic, anti-imperialist doctrine. In this new ideological framework, the United States was designated as the Great Satan, and Israel was branded the Little Satan. The very existence of Israel was deemed an illegitimate colonialist implant in the heart of the Islamic world, an affront to the faith that had to be eradicated. The strategic alignment that had defined Israeli-Iranian relations for 3 decades evaporated almost overnight, replaced by an uncompromising theological animosity that would reshape regional dynamics for generations. The diplomatic rupture was swift, total, and highly theatrical. Just days after the triumph of the revolution, the new Iranian authorities systematically severed all official ties with the State of Israel. The unofficial Israeli embassy in Tehran, once the nerve center of regional espionage and diplomacy, was surrounded by revolutionary guards. In a highly symbolic and deeply provocative gesture, the compound was formally handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization. Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO, was invited to Tehran as the first foreign dignitary of the new republic, welcomed with a hero's reception. The keys to the Israeli mission were literally handed to Arafat, physically manifesting Iran's new absolute commitment to the Palestinian cause. Flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran were immediately grounded, trade was abruptly halted, and the immense joint infrastructure projects, including the vital oil pipeline, were abandoned. The Israeli diplomats and intelligence officers who had spent decades building the alliance were forced into a hasty and perilous evacuation. The Iron Curtain had descended between the two nations, transforming the closest of strategic partners into the bitterest of declared enemies in a matter of weeks. To comprehend the depth of this new enmity, one must understand the utility of anti-Zionism for the nascent Islamic Republic. Ayatollah Khomeini faced a significant geopolitical hurdle. He was a Shia cleric attempting to claim the mantle of leadership over a global Islamic community that is overwhelmingly Sunni. Furthermore, Iranians are ethnically Persian, not Arab. To transcend these sectarian and ethnic divides, Khomeini needed a unifying cause that resonated across the entire Muslim world. The Palestinian struggle and the opposition to Israel provided the perfect ideological bridge. By adopting the most uncompromising stance against Israel, surpassing even the most radical Arab states in its rhetoric, Iran sought to outflank its Sunni rivals and assert itself as the true vanguard of Islamic resistance. Anti-Zionism was woven into the very DNA of the new state's constitution and its military doctrine. The Quds Force, an elite branch of the newly formed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, was explicitly named after the Arabic word for Jerusalem, signifying its ultimate stated objective. The destruction of Israel was no longer merely a political slogan. It became a sacred foundational pillar of Iranian statecraft. Yet the history of warfare is rarely a straightforward narrative of ideological purity. In 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq launched a massive invasion of Iran, igniting a brutal, protracted conflict that would last for 8 devastating years. The nascent Islamic Republic, isolated, facing an arms embargo and struggling to maintain its military readiness, found itself in desperate need of weapons and spare parts for its predominantly American-made arsenal. In a staggering display of geopolitical pragmatism, Israel stepped into the void. Despite the virulent anti-Zionist rhetoric emanating from Tehran, the Israeli military and intelligence establishment viewed Saddam Hussein's Iraq as the more immediate and formidable existential threat, guided by the ancient maxim that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Israel initiated Operation Seashell, a highly classified program to covertly supply the Iranian military with vital anti-tank missiles, aircraft parts, and ammunition. For the strategists in Jerusalem, prolonging the war between two of its greatest adversaries was a strategic imperative designed to exhaust and degrade both nations. This bizarre, clandestine cooperation amidst public hostility highlighted the complex, multi-layered nature of Middle Eastern military strategy. This covert arms pipeline reached its most infamous crescendo during the mid-1980s with what became known globally as the Iran-Contra affair. The United States, officially maintaining a strict arms embargo against Iran, sought to secure the release of American hostages held by Iranian-backed militias in Lebanon. Israel acted as the indispensable intermediary in this convoluted geopolitical gambit. Israeli officials facilitated the sale of advanced American TOW anti-tank missiles and Hawk anti-aircraft systems to the Islamic Republic. The proceeds from these clandestine sales were then illegally diverted by elements within the US administration to fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. For Israel, this operation was multifaceted. It cemented its role as an invaluable strategic asset to the United States. It maintained the vital flow of arms to keep Iran engaged in its grinding war with Iraq. And it sought to cultivate relationships with moderate elements within the Iranian military establishment, hoping against hope that a post-Khomeini era might see a return to the pragmatic alliances of the past. It was a high-stakes, deeply cynical game of three-dimensional geopolitical chess played out in the shadows of international law. While Israel was covertly arming Iran in the east, a far more ominous development was unfolding to the north. In 1982, Israel launched a massive military invasion of Lebanon, aiming to eradicate the PLO presence that had been launching attacks across its northern border. The invasion succeeded in expelling the PLO from Beirut, but the subsequent prolonged Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon created a volatile vacuum. Iran, seizing a historic opportunity to project its revolutionary power directly to Israel's borders, dispatched roughly 1,500 officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to the Bekaa Valley. Their mission was clear: to organize, train, and arm the disenfranchised Shia population of Lebanon into a formidable resistance force. The result of this intensive Iranian investment was the creation of Hezbollah, the Party of God. Armed with Iranian weaponry, funded by Iranian capital, and guided by Iranian military doctrine, Hezbollah rapidly evolved from a ragtag militia into a highly disciplined, heavily armed paramilitary organization. This marked the birth of Iran's proxy warfare strategy, a paradigm shift that would fundamentally alter the security architecture of the Levant. The establishment of Hezbollah was not an isolated incident, but the vanguard of a grand strategic vision. The Iranian leadership in Tehran quickly realized that direct conventional military confrontation with Israel, backed by the technological might of the United States, was suicidal. Instead, they perfected the art of asymmetric warfare. By cultivating, arming, and directing non-state proxy groups across the region, Iran could continuously bleed Israel, force it to expend vast military resources, and maintain a constant state of insecurity, all while maintaining plausible deniability and avoiding devastating retaliatory strikes on Iranian soil. Hezbollah became the gold standard for this model, engaging Israeli forces in a grinding 18-year guerrilla war of attrition in southern Lebanon that eventually forced an Israeli withdrawal in the year 2000. This success validated the Iranian strategy, leading to the formalization of what Tehran calls the axis of resistance. This network of militant organizations, bound by a shared anti-Western and anti-Zionist ideology, transformed the nature of the conflict. Israel was no longer facing just the Iranian state, but a Hydra-headed coalition of heavily armed militias encircling its borders. The dawn of the 1990s brought a tectonic shift in the global order that violently accelerated the collision course between Israel and Iran. The collapse of the Soviet Union removed the overarching superpower rivalry that had historically constrained regional actors. More critically for the Middle East, the swift and devastating defeat of Saddam Hussein's Iraq by a US-led coalition during the 1991 Gulf War profoundly altered the regional balance of power. For decades, Iraq had served as a formidable buffer, a mutual enemy that consumed the military attention of both Jerusalem and Tehran. With the Iraqi military machine dismantled and the Soviet threat extinguished, the strategic landscape was laid bare. Israel and Iran, the two remaining undisputed non-Arab military powers in the region, suddenly found themselves staring directly at each other across the geopolitical void. Without a shared adversary to distract them, the ideological enmity that had been festering since the 1979 revolution was free to fully manifest into a direct, zero-sum struggle for regional hegemony. The era of pragmatic, covert cooperation was definitively buried under the rubble of the Cold War. Freed from the constraints of the Iran-Iraq War, the Islamic Republic began to project its lethal capabilities far beyond the borders of the Middle East, escalating the shadow war to a terrifying global scale. The early 1990s witnessed a shocking escalation in international terrorism directed at Israeli and Jewish targets, orchestrated by Iranian intelligence and executed by its premier proxy, Hezbollah. In 1992, a suicide bomber drove a pickup truck loaded with explosives into the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, Argentina, reducing the building to rubble and killing 29 people. 2 years later, an even more devastating attack struck the Amir Jewish Community Center in the same city, claiming 85 lives in the deadliest terrorist attack in Argentina's history. Exhaustive international investigations unequivocally trace the planning, funding, and logistical support for these atrocities back to the highest echelons of the Iranian government in Tehran. These bombings marked a chilling evolution in the conflict. Iran demonstrated its willingness and capacity to strike civilian targets half a world away, signaling to Israel that the battleground was no longer confined to the Levant, but encompassed the entire globe. Simultaneously, the 1990s saw the emergence of the Oslo Accords, a historic, albeit fragile, peace process between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. For the Iranian leadership, the prospect of a negotiated settlement between Israelis and Palestinians was anathema. A successful peace treaty would not only legitimize the existence of the State of Israel, but would also severely undermine Iran's ideological claim as the champion of the Palestinian resistance, stripping Tehran of its primary vehicle for regional influence. Consequently, Iran deployed its immense resources to systematically sabotage the peace process. Tehran exponentially increased its financial, logistical, and military support for Palestinian rejectionist groups, most notably Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These organizations, bolstered by Iranian backing, launched a relentless campaign of suicide bombings targeting Israeli buses, cafes, and city centers throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. By fueling this devastating wave of violence, Iran succeeded in shattering the Israeli public's confidence in the peace process, empowering hardliners, and ensuring that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remained an open, bleeding wound to be exploited. As the new millennium dawned, the shadow war entered its most perilous and consequential phase. In 2002, an Iranian dissident group publicly revealed the existence of massive clandestine nuclear facilities at Natanz and Arak, sites previously unknown to the International Atomic Energy Agency. These revelations sent shockwaves through the global intelligence community and triggered alarm bells in Jerusalem. The sheer scale and secrecy of the uranium enrichment and heavy water projects strongly suggested that Iran was pursuing the capability to develop nuclear weapons, despite its persistent denials. For the State of Israel, a nuclear-armed Iran was not merely a strategic challenge, it was perceived as an unacceptable existential threat. The prospect of an ideologically driven regime, which explicitly and repeatedly called for the annihilation of the Jewish state, possessing the ultimate weapon of mass destruction, fundamentally altered Israel's strategic calculus. The prevention of a nuclear Iran became the absolute overriding priority of Israeli foreign, military, and intelligence policy, setting the stage for a dramatic escalation in covert military operations and international diplomatic pressure. Faced with this looming existential crisis, the Israeli security establishment reinvigorated a core tenet of its national defense strategy, the Begin Doctrine, named after former Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who ordered the audacious 1981 airstrike that destroyed Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. The doctrine explicitly states that Israel will preemptively use military force to prevent any sworn enemy from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. In 2007, Israel demonstrated its commitment to this doctrine by executing Operation Orchard, a daring airstrike that obliterated a clandestine nuclear reactor being constructed in the Syrian desert with North Korean assistance. This strike served as a stark, unmistakable warning to Tehran. Israel was unequivocally communicating its willingness to employ unilateral, devastating military force to halt nuclear proliferation in its vicinity. However, the Iranian nuclear program was vastly more complex, deeply buried in hardened underground bunkers and dispersed across multiple locations, rendering a single decisive airstrike nearly impossible. This necessitated a shift towards a more insidious, technological, and sustained campaign of disruption. The impossibility of a simple kinetic strike birthed a revolutionary new era of warfare. In 2010, the Iranian nuclear program was struck by an invisible, unprecedented weapon, the Stuxnet computer worm. Widely believed to be a joint creation of Israeli and American intelligence agencies, Stuxnet was a marvel of malicious engineering. It was the first known cyber weapon designed specifically to bridge the digital and physical worlds, causing catastrophic physical destruction. The worm infiltrated the isolated computer networks of the Natanz enrichment facility, secretly taking control of the programmable logic controllers that manage the delicate high-speed centrifuges. Stuxnet subtly altered the rotational speeds of the centrifuges, causing them to tear themselves apart from the inside out, while simultaneously playing back normal operating data to the Iranian engineers, masking the sabotage until the destruction was complete. This brilliant, silent strike temporarily crippled Iran's uranium enrichment capabilities, setting the program back by years. More importantly, it inaugurated the era of state-sponsored cyber warfare, transforming lines of code into weapons of mass disruption in the ongoing shadow conflict. Alongside the deployment of advanced cyber weaponry, the clandestine war manifested in far more visceral and bloody tactics. Between 2010 and 2012, a string of highly coordinated, audacious assassinations targeted Iran's top nuclear scientists and engineers on the busy streets of Tehran. These operations, universally attributed to the Israeli Mossad, were executed with chilling precision, often involving operatives on motorcycles attaching magnetic shape charge explosives to the vehicles of the scientists during morning rush hour. The objective was twofold: to physically eliminate the irreplaceable human capital and technical expertise driving the nuclear program, and to instill a pervasive sense of paranoia and terror within the Iranian scientific establishment. The apex of this targeted killing campaign occurred much later, in 2020, with the spectacular assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the reputed mastermind of Iran's covert nuclear weapons project. He was eliminated by a highly advanced, satellite-controlled, artificial intelligence-assisted machine gun mounted in the back of a pickup truck. The shadow war had evolved into a high-tech, lethal game of cat and mouse. While the nuclear standoff dominated global headlines, the geopolitical tectonic plates shifted dramatically again with the outbreak of the Syrian civil war in 2011. As the regime of Bashar al-Assad teetered on the brink of collapse, Iran intervened massively to save its crucial Arab ally. Tehran poured billions of dollars, thousands of Hezbollah fighters, and elite Quds force commanders into the Syrian meat grinder. This intervention succeeded in preserving the Assad regime, but it profoundly altered the strategic map for Israel. For the first time, Iranian military forces and their proxy militias were establishing a permanent, entrenched military footprint right on Israel's northeastern doorstep along the Golan Heights. Iran sought to transform Syria into a forward operating base, constructing missile factories, establishing drone launch sites, and attempting to create a contiguous land bridge stretching from Tehran through Baghdad and Damascus directly to Hezbollah in Lebanon. This aggressive expansionism presented an unacceptable strategic encirclement for the Israeli military, forcing a dramatic escalation in its operational posture. In response to this expanding Iranian presence in Syria, the Israeli Defense Forces initiated a sustained, highly active military strategy known as the Campaign Between the Wars, or by its Hebrew acronym, MABAM. This strategy represents a continuous, proactive military effort designed to degrade enemy capabilities and deter escalation without crossing the threshold into all-out conventional war. Over the past decade, the Israeli Air Force has conducted thousands of precision airstrikes across Syrian territory. The targets of this relentless campaign are specific and strategic: convoys transporting advanced precision-guided munitions to Hezbollah, Iranian drone facilities, air defense systems, and bases housing Iranian Revolutionary Guard personnel. The objective is to constantly disrupt Iran's logistical supply lines, prevent the transfer of game-changing weaponry to proxy forces, and exact a heavy cost for Iran's military entrenchment in the Levant. This campaign is a high-wire act of military brinkmanship. Israel continuously degrades Iranian capabilities while meticulously calculating the exact amount of force necessary to achieve its objectives without provoking a massive retaliation that could ignite a regional conflagration. As the land and air campaigns intensified, the shadow war inevitably spilled over into the maritime domain, expanding the conflict across critical global shipping lanes. Beginning around 2019, a series of mysterious explosions and sabotage operations began plaguing commercial and military vessels in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Israel targeted Iranian oil tankers attempting to smuggle petroleum to Syria in violation of international sanctions, aiming to choke off the financial lifeblood of the Quds force. In retaliation, Iran employed limpet mines and suicide drones to attack Israeli-owned or linked commercial cargo ships navigating the vital waterways of the Middle East. This tit-for-tat naval guerrilla warfare added a highly volatile, unpredictable dimension to the conflict, threatening the freedom of navigation and the stability of global energy markets. Both sides engaged in complex sabotage, carefully calibrated to damage the vessels and send a strategic message while generally avoiding mass casualties that could force an uncontrollable escalation. The waters of the Middle East had become yet another silent battlefield. Parallel to the kinetic conflict, a fierce diplomatic battle raged over the international community's approach to the Iranian nuclear program. The culmination of this diplomatic effort was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, signed in 2015 between Iran and world powers. The agreement lifted crippling economic sanctions on Iran in exchange for strict, verifiable limits on its nuclear activities. For the Obama administration and its European allies, the deal was a triumph of diplomacy, successfully placing Iran's nuclear ambitions in a verifiable box. However, for the Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the JCPOA was viewed as a historic, catastrophic capitulation. Israel argued vehemently that the deal merely delayed, rather than dismantled, Iran's nuclear infrastructure, while injecting billions of dollars into the Iranian economy, funds that Israel insisted would be immediately channeled to fund terrorism and proxy militias across the region. This profound strategic disagreement created a massive, unprecedented rift between Israel and its closest ally, the United States, highlighting the deep anxiety in Jerusalem regarding the international community's resolve to counter the Iranian threat. As the diplomatic landscape shifted, Iran accelerated the final phase of its grand strategic design, the Ring of Fire. This doctrine involves the systematic encirclement of Israel by heavily armed, ideologically aligned proxy militias capable of launching coordinated, multi-front attacks. To the south, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza have been transformed into formidable armies equipped with massive rocket arsenals. To the north, Hezbollah in Lebanon possesses an estimated 150,000 missiles, including precision-guided munitions capable of striking any target within Israel. To the northeast, Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq stand ready, and to the far south, the Houthi rebels in Yemen have been equipped with ballistic missiles and long-range drones capable of reaching the Israeli port of Eilat. This ring of fire is designed to create an intolerable strategic dilemma for Israel. Should Israel attempt a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, Tehran can activate this ring, subjecting the Israeli home front to a devastating, simultaneous bombardment from all sides, effectively holding the entire Israeli civilian population hostage to Iranian strategic dictates. For decades, the unwritten rules of this shadow war dictated that both Israel and Iran would strike at each other through proxies, cyber attacks, and covert sabotage, assiduously avoiding direct, overt military confrontation between their respective sovereign territories. However, recent events have seen these established red lines aggressively crossed, plunging the region into uncharted and terrifying territory. The unprecedented direct missile and drone barrages launched from Iranian soil towards Israel and the subsequent highly calibrated Israeli retaliatory strikes deep within Iranian territory mark a fundamental paradigm shift. The shadow war has stepped out into the blinding light of day. The strategic ambiguity that once provided a buffer against all-out war has been stripped away. Both nations are now engaged in a highly public, high-stakes test of deterrence, demonstrating their capabilities and their willingness to escalate. This transition from covert operations to direct military engagement represents the most dangerous phase of their historical enmity, where a single miscalculation, a single errant missile, could trigger a catastrophic regional war that draws in global superpowers. In observing the vast arc of this historical relationship, one is struck by the profound, tragic irony that defines the Middle East. Israel and Iran, two ancient non-Arab civilizations, once found common cause in their shared isolation, building a formidable alliance based on intelligence, energy, and mutual defense. Yet the tectonic shifts of revolution, ideology, and shifting global power dynamics have transmuted that pragmatic partnership into the most defining and volatile enmity of the 21st century. Today, they are locked in a zero-sum, multi-domain conflict that stretches from the cyber realm to the high seas, from the streets of Tehran to the skies over Damascus. The Iranian regime views the destruction of Israel as a theological imperative and a prerequisite for regional dominance, while Israel views the Iranian regime as an implacable, existential threat that must be countered at all costs. As the shadow war increasingly gives way to direct confrontation, the question is no longer when this opposition began, but how, or indeed if, this deeply entrenched, heavily armed enmity can ever be resolved before it engulfs the entire region in unparalleled catastrophe.